Next up, the reason you are all here today, we have a brilliant fireside chat that's going to happen between two amazing people. One of them is Mr. Raj Kapany. He is a Bay Area investor, philanthropist, and entrepreneur. His companies have raised over $50 million in venture funding. He's a trustee to the Sikh Foundation, and he's an expert in fiber optics. And I mean, I like bragging, but I think he wins it all because his father essentially invented fiber optics. His father is known as the father of fiber optics, Mr. Narendra Kapany. And the other speaker we have today, who here went to a UC school? All right, we got, what, about 10 people here? Awesome. I did too. We have the individual that has been investing your money. I'm just kidding. We have Mr. Jagdeep Bachher. He is the Chief Investment Officer for the UC system. For those of you who don't know, the UC system is very big. It's about 10 schools. They manage some money. He is the Chief Investment Officer managing assets for about, I think I learned today, $175 billion across private equity, venture capital, real estate, and lucky enough for us, it's actually an Indian individual that is managing that. So I want to ask these two brilliant folks to please come up on stage and take the mic from me. Huge round of applause.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. How are you? I hope everybody is doing well. Thank you for coming. Since Manveer has already introduced Jagdeep, I'm going to take a minute and go to a deep dive. I learned that Jagdeep has got an incredible background that I'd like to share with you, so please let me spend a few minutes on that. Jagdeep got to college at the age of 14 years old. He got his BA in Mechanical Engineering, University of Waterloo, MA Management Science, University of Waterloo, PhD Management Science, University of Waterloo. I'm still not done. He did a wealth management executive position at Manulife, one of the biggest insurance companies in Canada, president of JH Investments, executive vice president, COO, and CIO of AIMCO, Alberta Investment Management Corp., and now was reporting to the UC Regents in the capacity of Chief Investment Officer, as Manveer had said, $180 billion pension and endowments. So I'd like to raise another round of applause for Jagdeep coming and visiting with us.
Thank you.
Sat Sri Akal, Jagdeep.
Sat Sri Akal.
And namaste.
Namaste, adab.
Okay, so before we get started, I wanted to ask you, how did you get where you are in the position you're in? Take us back a little bit on your life, Nigeria, Canada.
Cool. Thank you all for coming and sharing an evening with us. First of all, where's Manveer? You're sharply dressed. I like the cufflinks. If you ran for office, maybe governor of California, I'm pretty confident we would vote for you. And wouldn't it be nice to have an Indian governor of California one of these days?
Soon.
I appreciate the question about my journey, but my journey is always nestled in our journey. It takes a lot of people to get one person to where they are, and then still it takes a lot more people to help you sort of continue down that journey. So first and foremost, and I'm confident my parents and my wife and kids and my father-in-law and others are watching today from home, but all of them have played a significant role in getting me to where I am today. And that's on the personal front. But professionally, whatever we accomplish is usually based on the teams that we surround ourselves with. And I have some of my team members who greedily enough took the VIP seating right in the front row here. But all of them, I actually asked him earlier on, like, it's very much appreciated that they come along with me to these events and give me the support, but that support is on a day in and day out basis to enable me to do what I can do on behalf of who we serve. The journey is really simplistic if you break it down in sort of 3 chunks. I would say for the technical founders here, 0 to 14 was in Nigeria. And my parents had lived there for 30 plus years. I was born there, and that's my upbringing. And at the age of 14, for me, we all moved as a family, like every other immigrant story, to some other part of the world. And typically that other part of the world is for education. And so we moved to Canada in our case. And I know you rattled off University of Waterloo, University of Waterloo, University of Waterloo. So you can imagine I was unimaginative in terms of which, I didn't even know there were other schools you could go to. But I stayed at the University of Waterloo, and now 35 years later, my parents still live in Waterloo. I still consider that home, where both my mom and dad are. But that's where I went to school, and I would say that was 14 basically to 41. That was chapter 2. And during that chapter, of course, when they let you leave school, you got to get a job. And so Manulife, I tried being an entrepreneur in the first 3 years after leaving school, and then I ended up getting a job at Manulife Financial, which is, at the time and still is, Canada's large insurance company. And just at the time, they had bought John Hancock, which is a very well-known brand in the United States, insurance brand. So I worked there, and I got my learning opportunity and experience and really entree into the world of finance at Manulife for 5 years. And then I moved to Alberta, not necessarily because I fell in love with the Rocky Mountains in Canada, but the person I worked for at Manulife, who had hired me, moved to Alberta, and I was recruited to move to Alberta to be his chief operating officer, and he was the chief investment officer and the chief executive officer. So essentially for a decade, I worked for one person. And many a times in our lives, we think about our careers in the context of the logos where we've worked. But I think deeper, it's usually the people we work with that give us that connection to why we stay somewhere for extended periods of time. Somewhere along that journey, I got married. My wife, Jasprit, is from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And of course, and she's an emergency physician. It was easier for her to work in the US than to work in Canada. We still have the British system in Canada. Things are a little complicated at times to cross-pollinate between America and Canada. And so I was looking for opportunities in the US. And I would just say that the last 10 years, I've now been at the University of California. And in hindsight, I consider myself incredibly blessed to be able to move from Canada, not just anywhere in the United States, but to California. And to have the opportunity to work at a university, not having gone to this university, not having been an alumni of this university, or frankly, even appreciating the breadth and the depth of what the University of California is. And so I get to work at the UC in the capacity that I am in today as the Chief Investment Officer. And I'll conclude, since all of you are budding entrepreneurs or established entrepreneurs, or some of you unicorn entrepreneurs, if you think about the University of California as a company, our revenues, what we call our top line, is about 45 to 50 billion a year. Off that top line, about 25 to 30 billion is healthcare. And that comes from all the hospitals we have. So we're kind of like a small university tucked into a big hospital system, is another way to look at us. We have 300,000 staff and faculty, and we have customers, students, 285,000 students. Manveer is an alumni from UC Davis. And I'm sure we have others in the room here today. And my team and I have the responsibility to manage the balance sheet of this company, which stands at about $175 billion today. So that's been my journey. And in many ways, I feel like I've just got my bachelor's degree and I've just graduated after 10 years of being at the UC. I consider this the start of my career at this point in time.
Thank you, Jagdeep. You took the UC CIO office from 90 billion when you got there, and it is now at close to $180 billion. Can you tell us a little bit about your job specifically? You know, what a typical day is like, what a particular, specific week is like, what you go through as a CIO?
Sure. The days were frantic when I joined because there was a lot to learn. They've become a bit more relaxed now, but only because I have a better sense of what is important to help grow our assets, and I can lean on my team even more to help with other areas of the organization. But, if any of you had a company that you were growing by 2x in 10 years, if you're a venture capitalist and you had a fund, which is a typical life cycle, right? And you had a 2x on the fund, you'd be pretty happy. It gets harder when you go from a couple of $100 million fund to $1 billion fund and even a multi-billion dollar fund. I could just tell you it's super hard when it gets to 90 billion as a starting point and then to try and double that. But here's the interesting thing. I was thinking about it today. We're 170 billion, and my team might even be surprised by this. But 10 years from now, we will be managing money for our customers for 102 years, because that's the age of the time we've been managing money at the Office of the Chief Investment Officer. And I am willing to guess 10 years from now, we will be close to $350 billion versus 170 to 180 today. I know it's a little hard to fathom that at this point in time, but that's the trajectory we are on. And so to your question about how do you do that, it's impossible to figure out what the markets are going to give you tomorrow, a month from now, or a year from now. In fact, the one thing that is almost constant is that the markets will always surprise you. And so it's critical to stay invested and have a long time horizon when you invest, and stop trying to second guess the markets or outsmart the markets. In fact, the only thing that comes in the way of success in your investment results is what human beings do in terms of human activity and their anxiety and their animal spirits. So patience is extremely important. Having said that, the other thing that works well for us is when we think about how we need to manage money for our customers, we've developed a culture in our office which we call the UC Investments Way. And what that culture entails is 10 pillars, 10 principles, which, by the way, I didn't invent them before I came here. They are designed for the benefit of the University of California, at the University of California, in our office. The first of them is less is more. The second is risk rules. The third is concentrate. And the list goes on. So we end up using that culture as our set of guiding principles. And by the way, it's no different than how you're living your lives. Be honest, be trustworthy, be a person of high integrity, things of that nature. And what we have found is over these 10 years, if we follow these principles in the way we pick and choose things to buy or sell, we somehow end up in a place that is twice as much, it's bigger, and it's better, and it's simpler. The most interesting fact for you in all of this is when I joined, we had 50 people managing 90-ish billion. Today we have 50 people managing $175 billion. So our culture enables us, not just in terms of doing fewer things. And then to the point that you asked about how's my day and how's my week, I think everyone's got their formula on how to operate and be successful in whatever they do. What I strive to do the most of is do almost nothing on my calendar every day in terms of meetings. And literally my calendar is practically free almost all day. That doesn't mean I'm idle all day, but I force myself to have time to think about where the best opportunities might be, because without having time to think, it gets really hard to navigate a lot of the noise that we live in on a daily basis, especially in the investments marketplace.
Jagdeep, when you look around the room here, you see a lot of technology founder startups.
I just see younger people.
You see younger people, definitely younger than me. But I think when you look at the criteria you have to make an investment,
Sure.
what do you look at the team, the technology, the market? What are the kinds of things you look at to make that investment?
So I think what is most important to all of you is how do we look at investing in entrepreneurs and in venture capital? Because that's an area that you're all deeply in the center of. In fact, you're talking about doing India investments. Let me just share a little fact with you. If you had put $100 in the S&P 500 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, the one country in the world that has beaten the S&P 500 is India. And all you needed to do was just buy MSCI India, which is the index of the stock market in India. And we did that about 8 years ago as a way to get access to India. And over time, we've actually invested close to $3 billion in India. And I completely buy the sentiment that there's a lot of stuff going on in India. Not as easy when you're sitting in California to navigate a lot of the challenges that come about investing at a distance. But India is definitely the other part of the world outside of the United States that I think it's incredibly exciting from an entrepreneurship standpoint. In terms of what we're looking for, particularly here in the United States, we have a little bit, everybody has to have an edge. Everybody has to have a network, right? And in our case, it is the fact that we have 300,000 students at the University of California. Clearly, some of these students are going to create great companies, many names you've heard of already. So if we get a company that comes to us from a founder that is at the UC, at one of our campuses, or a faculty member or staff member, immediately our excitement can be seen. If that founder happens to be somebody that's a serial entrepreneur, our excitement doubles almost immediately. And let me give you a tangible example of it. 10 years ago, I met a gentleman, Professor Dennis Slayman, in a basement at UCLA. I met him because I was being told that we missed out on an invention that happened at UCLA for a drug called Herceptin. And Herceptin is the standard of care for breast cancer in the world today. We developed it at UCLA. Dennis figured it out, and we gave it away to industry for free. It today is about a $100 billion drug. I met Dennis. 10 years later, December of 2022, Christmas time, I got a call. And Dennis had another thing for ovarian cancer, which is pretty much a death sentence. Craig and I, who's sitting in the audience, and a couple of other people flew out that Monday morning to LA to meet Dennis. And it only took us immediately, it took us sort of less than a couple of hours to make a decision to lead the round. Candidly, we were betting on a serial entrepreneur. We were betting on a family member. We were betting on something that came from our network. We could diligence the science with a bit more certainty. And the best thing is we managed Dennis's pension. Dennis was going to give us the right advice because his entire pension is managed at our office. And so you need to have some honesty and truth attached to knowing that you can do your reference check. I'm confident that what Dennis has developed with his team at Toral Biotherapeutics is going to evolve into being certainly another blockbuster. It's on its way to being that. And something like that makes a significant difference to our endowment. So we don't try to do everything with everybody. We try to do few things, less is more, with people we know and we trust, and we have a way of diligencing and leveling so that we know there are going to be misses, but the ones we get right, we want them to be outsized, and we can have a large enough network in our ecosystem. Just like Plug and Play is a phenomenal network. Similarly, the University of California, we have 10 campuses. Everywhere you turn in the state of California, we have an opportunity that we can touch. And so why go looking elsewhere? And then, of course, you're sitting at the cusp of the beginning of what is another technological revolution. There are only going to be a few places in the world where artificial intelligence is going to have a disruptive, outsized impact, and it's going to come from academia. And the University of California, Berkeley is going to be one of those hotspots, in addition to Stanford and MIT and other places around the world. So we think about what is our edge, where is our network, who do we trust, how can we validate things quickly, and is there a way in which we know that we're getting the straight bill of goods? Now, if we lose money on a base of $175 billion, we've invested $1 billion in companies coming out of the UC ecosystem in the last decade, and we're just getting started. I can envision over the next 5, we could probably do another $5 billion just based on the scale of what is going on with the new technologies. So life sciences and artificial intelligence seem to be the two areas that are going to be ripe for incredible opportunities as we think about a disruptive world over the next decade.
Would you like some wine?
You see, how many times do you go to one of these things and your host actually gets a bottle of wine for you? I think he wants to have a glass of wine. If have a sip, and I'll pour some for myself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Listen, I'm taking it down a little bit too personal. What part did the Sikh heritage play on your life? What types of things did it provide you in your career and in your family life? And what influence did your parents have on that, on you?
So the question is around my Sikh heritage. Obviously, you don't have to guess the visible nature of that. It's sort of dead obvious when you look at me. But it's also something that is incredibly a deep connection with your family as well. And you know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that as a kid growing up, as much as you can be influenced by your parents and what you see around you, there are icons of society that inspire you to achieve things. And your dad, Dr. Kapany, is absolutely an icon of the Sikh family, Sikh culture, Sikh heritage. And ever since I was a kid, I remember reading about in Fortune magazine about him, on people that have changed the world. And coming to California at the 50th anniversary, I had that first opportunity to meet him when he called me to come and speak at the Sikh Foundation. And then we had lunch a couple of times over the years before COVID. But it was clear that, you know, what he has done, and he's a big believer in Sikh art and the Sikh heritage. My parents instilled I was born and brought up in Nigeria, clearly not exactly where you'd think that, you know, you would embrace and adapt or adopt your Sikh heritage, but it really is about the family and your parents. And actually, more importantly, today when I actually look at my own family and I look at what my wife does with my kids, you know, both of them go to Sunday school at the Gurdwara in El Sabrante. Both of them take part in the Hemkund competition. Both of them can speak Gurmukhi and have Gurmat studies. And I can't even write the language, even though you might think I can. I can speak certainly in Punjabi and Hindi. So family plays an incredibly important role. And both my in-laws and my parents certainly have inculcated these values in us. And I think at some point we all debate, do we want to keep our faith because there's peer pressure and there might be the lack of welcome feeling in the new society that you go into. But you know, honestly, two things for me. One is I've always respected the values that our parents have given us. And out of respect for them, we would never deviate away from that pathway. And then the second thing is, it's cool to wear a turban. I mean, you may not think it is, but it makes you instantaneously different. And here we are living in a world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, I don't need to run around celebrating other diversities only because I don't have my own diversity. I've got my diversity. I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of that difference. And I should celebrate that as much as we celebrate others around us and underrepresented minorities. So I've always thought it's cool. And actually, it's never been a negative. Might sound silly, but I've never viewed it as a negative. I can tell you ample stories where it's actually been a positive for me in how my career has progressed. But I think what it does is having your own faith and your willpower to maintain your heritage also gives you the confidence to be who you are and to be comfortable in your own skin, wherever you might be, in any audience and in any setting. And then you could play. I mean, this is called plug and play. So you can play with your culture, right, a little bit. Why not? I mean, if the girls are going to wear different color lipsticks every day, why not put on a different color turban every day? It's kind of fun.
Well, Jagdeep, that raises a very important point.
The lipstick or the turban?
The turban.
I can't answer the lipstick question.
How many colors of turbans do you have?
I have a lot of colors, and I match the colors, and it turns out into being an excessive hobby. Luckily enough, by the meter, they're not as expensive as buying other pieces of clothing. But it's kind of fun, and I enjoy it, and I think I probably have 50 to 100 different shades of colors of things that I can match things with. But I think, for me, this has been a very important part of who I am, and as time has gone on, it has given me the ability to have more confidence that being different is actually totally cool. And then, of course, in the last couple of years, I've realized it is actually really cool because it's called diversity, equity, and inclusion. I hadn't connected the dots before that, but here we are. So
you talked
I like
about,
your socks.
Thank you very much. You talked about diversity, equality, and inclusion.
Have a glass of wine. I feel bad now. You offered me, and
trust me, I'm feeling it. Don't worry. Good. Diversity. How the UC system is so incredibly supportive of DEI, and they want to see it everywhere. How have you promoted this within your group, the Chief Investment Officer group? What actions are you taking to make it a reality? Or is it a reality?
It is a reality, and what we've realized is that as we've learned about how to have a more diverse workforce within our own office, how to have a more diverse network amongst the partners we invest with, those that provide us services, everybody universally agrees that there's one thing that is sorely needed, which is a talent pipeline. And so the more we thought about that, we came to the conclusion that we actually have 300,000 students at the University of California. And the hardest thing is not when you've actually got a venture fund called an emerging manager fund and you show up in our office, because by then you've been through so many obstacles to get to that point. You really are cream of the crop. And I know there are challenges at that point as well. But when you're a long-term investor and you want to solve a problem sustainably with a 30, 50, 100-year view for future generations, you dig deeper into the root cause, which is talent. So we created something called the UC Investments Academy. And the purpose of the academy is very simple. We want to train students with knowledge around finance and investments. And if we can do that, give them the content, help them with a community, ultimately we'll give them the confidence to be able to find the path in the world that best suits them, whether it's finance or not. And we've been doing this now for just about 2.5 years. We set a goal of being able to reach 10,000 students within 5 years. I'm pleasantly surprised and happy with the fact that we're at 2,500 students already in 2 years, and we've actually placed close to 140 students in jobs. So the goal here is I'm more than confident we're going to get to 10,000 students now because we can see it happening. We've expanded beyond finance and investments to artificial intelligence and entrepreneurship as well. In fact, a shout out to everybody at UC Santa Cruz watching today, one of our partners with which we're doing things in finance and investments, where your dad supports and the foundation is very supportive. So there's a lot going on, and I think, you know, we can add 10% more to a staff of 50 mathematically. That's a few people. 2,500 is sort of 100x or even more than 100x multiplication. So I think trying to solve problems at the root cause and trying to have solutions with a very long time horizon in mind is where we feel most gratified, and it's the hardest thing to do.
Switching to geopolitical tension, which is something I worry about, quite honestly. We have China shaking hands with Iran and Russia and all of these things happening, Ukraine, Gaza. It's an interesting time period for all of us. How are you navigating your team through all of this?
Wow, we're going from diversity, equity, and inclusion to geopolitics. This is tougher than the SAT. I wish there was a multiple choice.
I didn't say it was going to be easy.
No, it's definitely not easy. Okay, let me switch here. I think in the last 30 years, when you look back, we've been living in a world of people coming together, borders coming down, societies trying to lift people out of poverty, countries aspiring to become like the West, democracy taking a broader foothold across the geopolitical map of the world, and generally a great acceptance for the rise of other superpowers beyond the United States. And along that journey, somewhere in 2008, we had what we call the global financial crisis. Now, that, interestingly enough, when you look back, was a very civilized problem and a civilized set of solutions, because everybody around the world came together. The Chinese and the Koreans and the Japanese were willing to bail out our financial institutions in the United States without hesitation, and everybody worked in a harmonious fashion to make sure that we were able to stabilize the US and the financial system for the benefit of the world and carry on. Now, the last 5 years seem to have been a little different. You've had the rise of a populist agenda politically. You've had the rhetoric of borders going up, the other way around. You've had tariffs and regulations being imposed. You've had governments not necessarily being extremely friendly to businesses and growth. And you've also had, particularly in a year like this year, where you almost have a quarter of the population going to vote in an election somewhere or the other. In fact, India being the next one on the docket this coming week. You have a lot of change that's going on. Of course, in addition to that, you never anticipated that you would have a once-in-a-100-year pandemic called COVID, which we all seem to have forgotten about because there are no masks in this room. That also gave rise to a whole bunch of complications that in many ways have sort of structurally, not transitorily, changed the way in which we work and we operate. So the last 5 years have been a period of, frankly, sort of a very disruptive type of environment that is not what we were used to in the prior 25 years. Of course, with that comes the fact that governments have had to induce the economy with all kinds of stimulus, and the length and the value of that stimulus in the pandemic far exceeded what we did in the global financial crisis. And what we do is now we find ourselves in a place today where the whole world has taken on about $315 billion of debt. That's a lot of money. And so you've got fiscal and monetary policy trying to adjust to the new reality that we live in. Of course, you have inflation that seems like what it used to be in the 80s, kicked back in. And that era of cheap money with interest rates being close to zero seems to have evaporated. But we are human beings. We want to go back to the way it used to be. We want to get back to zero. We want to get back to our normal ways of doing things, except going to the office. We want, but maybe go to restaurants instead. That was a little dig. We want to do things because most people are not comfortable with change. I think the change that we have seen in the last 4 years is going to be here to stay, and the reality is people need to get comfortable with it. I didn't add the Middle East, because the Middle East, and of course, in these last 4 or 5 years, you've also seen commodity prices rise, and with those commodity prices and high oil prices, you actually have more wealth in parts of the world that you didn't anticipate had that much wealth, because you had declining commodity prices for the decade prior. As a result, if you're a soccer fan, you got to go to Saudi Arabia to watch your best player, not Miami, or maybe Miami too. But certainly, whether you're in golf or in all kinds of sports, there's new people in the world. The other thing that's going to happen is in the next decade, you're going to see probably $1 trillion sized funds that are going to have money to buy things around the world. So you have a very different landscape in the last 5 years. The answers are not clear, the questions are obvious, and the solutions may not be permanent and here to stay today, and you need to be flexible. But the two things in conclusion are constant. America has two competitive advantages, in my opinion, that are unparalleled on a global scale. One is a very flexible fiscal and monetary policy, which we've employed, that has gotten us out of the GFC and COVID much better than any other nation on the planet. And secondly, I can say this because if you're Indian, you want to have your kids go to a great school in the United States, whether you're in India or you're here in America, hopefully the UC. And in order to make that happen, Americans have never forgotten that the educational system is its biggest competitive advantage. And not only that, but it's also an innovation engine for America. Those two things, I think, are going to play out beautifully over the next 10 years, in addition to the fact that we may very well be at the cusp of a brand new technological revolution. I mean, yes, fiber optics is embedded in everything we do, but it's possible that we will get to cures for lung cancer and ovarian cancer, and we will possibly find ways of doing things, whether it's through Copilot or assisting us in new forms of productivity, and maybe plug and play is the type of model for a workforce of the future, as opposed to what I do at the UC, which is pull and work all day long. That's the definition of a bureaucracy. But there are new models of working evolving. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening. But I would just say, however this landscape is changing, it's going to remain constantly changing over the next 30 years. And the trick is to embrace change, to have fun with it, to actually enjoy it, and to find what might be the best opportunities. Because none of you think about problems, right? All of you think about solutions. And as entrepreneurs, you're thinking about what's the next greatest company you can create. Well, that change only comes when there's disruption. And the world is a hotbed of disruption today.
Well said. You've spent 10 years at the UC CIO office, and there's been a release regarding a chancellorship at Waterloo.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about what you're going to be doing there and what your involvement will be?
Absolutely. So the best part is when the announcement went out on the 23rd of October that I had been appointed as the 12th incoming chancellor of the University of Waterloo, most emails were congratulatory, but I also discovered some friends in the process because the kind of emails they sent me thinking that I was leaving the UC and they were looking for who next to talk to right away made me realize that maybe they truly aren't my friend. And so I'm now getting a little bit more careful in the relationships I have. But look, my parents have played a tremendous role, and you wouldn't believe it, but the person that at the immigration office in Nigeria, where my dad went to get the visa for Canada, he literally suggested that we moved to Waterloo because my dad said my son wants to go to engineering school and my daughter wants to go to med school. And that's how we ended up in Waterloo, literally because some immigration officer in Nigeria said go to Waterloo. Very well thought out. But you know what? I showed up at the age of 14. I got my 3 degrees from Waterloo. And my parents have been teachers both in Nigeria, and I've almost been teaching for 60 years. So education is a deep part of our family. And when you get the call to be the chancellor of the university that has given you the education that has made you who you are, and it's an opportunity to give back, I mean, it's not a resume thing that you can ever envision to get, or it's not something you ever plan for, but it actually makes you realize that giving is so much more exciting than taking in life. And the fact that you've been given this opportunity to give in this type of a role just makes it something that I'm so excited for as a chapter. Now, I don't leave my job at the University of California. Just to clarify, in Canada, chancellors, we still have the British system. Chancellors are ceremonial. We have a daytime president and vice chancellor who actually runs the university. The job of the chancellor is to preside over convocations, which is twice a year, hand out degrees, and wear a nice robe, a matching turban, and socks, depending on the faculty, and give speeches to inspire students. So I'm very much looking forward to do that. But more importantly, what's interesting is sometimes things happen in your life that open up new networks. Waterloo is phenomenal when it comes to a tech founder network that exists in companies in Silicon Valley and around the world. And all of a sudden now, I have exposure in the last 10 years, not only to finance, but I'm getting to learn about amazing founders and amazing students that are from the University of Waterloo that are in all parts of the tech ecosystem of planet Earth. And that is an opportunity for me to sort of learn more, but then find new ways to connect dots and hopefully give more to the institution that has frankly given my family and I what we have today and what we're privileged to enjoy.
So we can say you are a Waterloo warrior.
Which is exactly, and you know, the funny thing is Sikhs are warriors too.
That's right.
So it all works out well. There's a God out there, there's a plan, and you got to go with the flow.
So Manveer, I think we're almost finished, but I wanted to open it up for some questions. If you could get a couple of runners. And Jagdeep, thank you so much for such a beautiful interview. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate all the hard work that goes in. Whilst you're getting the questions,
Yes.
in appreciation for the interview, one of the best books and things that I've read this year is a book on gratitude by Oliver Sacks. And I actually wanted to give it to you as my appreciation for all the hard work you've done to prepare. Many of you don't know it takes a lot to prepare for an interview and do the homework. And so with gratitude, it's an easy read and should not be any extra homework for you.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a love fest.
And by the way, when I came in the room here tonight, the first person that said hi to me and made me feel totally relaxed and comfortable was a young man who was standing at the back of the room, and he came over right away, and I learned his name is, am I pronouncing it right, Avid?
Avid, yes.
Well, I also have a book for Avid as well.
Where is that?
And Avid, this is a short
Avid, come
guide
up here.
to a happy life. You're welcome. Thank you. Really appreciate it. My pleasure. Okay.
Let's start with some questions, please.
All right.
There we go.
Yes, please.
Oh,
Oh,
thank
sorry.
you.
Okay, no, I didn't. No, you go ahead. You go. Absolutely, go ahead. Absolutely. Now we have 2 questions.
Okay, fantastic. First of all, wonderful, absolutely great conversation, and a couple of questions. I know since you are now focusing from an investment standpoint, public market is a big part of pension funds, right? I mean, private capital is actually a really big pool, and particularly when you look at the next 15, 20 years, close to $80 trillion is going to change hands. It has a very different investment thesis of where they want to invest, what they want to support, the next generation of private wealth. That's actually beginning to play a much more active role. And they are taking AI first, technology first approach. So how do you see, even as an investor, your own role getting disrupted in even just the next decade long, underlying plumbing architecture that's shifting on how do you even calculate an investment, what is the thesis, and is it going to be human-driven or machine-first driven, augmented by human? How do you think about this?
First of all, I can tell you are pretty savvy and sophisticated in finance. So let's take a second, if you can give her back the mic, please. Tell me about you. Give me your name and kind of what you do day to day.
I'm Anita Vadavato. I'm actually a VC, also a builder.
There you go.
So former operator, worked in venture-backed tech companies. Predominantly focused on biotech and AI presently.
Okay.
So,
awesome.
And again, so much is already shifting on the AGI biotech pathway that the level playing field is very different now. So
awesome. So I don't know how to answer your question on how the future is going to disrupt what we do today. But I think what is absolutely certain for both you and I is the future is yet to be invented. And what we both need to do is have the ability to recognize and take risk. And some of the things that are going to be the companies of the future that will make it up on the unicorn list 5 years from now on this screen don't exist today. Very likely somebody in this room is going to create one of those companies or one of the plug-and-play ecosystem companies. So I spend less time thinking about that other than just making sure I have the time not to be too busy that I can't spend the time to figure out where the next thing might be, number one. Number two, you're absolutely right. Investing is not a secret sauce or a black box or a red box. What it is if you listen to the likes of Warren Buffett, he likes to say that you should fire every endowment manager, also known as me, in America. You should put 90% of your money in the S&P 500 and 10% of your money in US Treasuries for liquidity. Close your eyes and wake up 30 years from now and you'll be just fine. In fact, you might be more than fine. In fact, if you look at the last 10 years, the S&P 500 has compounded at 13% a year for the last 10 years. We, out of $175 billion, have $49 billion invested in private markets, and the balance, over $120 billion, is in public markets, of which over $100 billion is in the stock market. And even in the stock market, it's either in the S&P 500 or the MSCI ACWI. So the public markets are a good way to work and benefit from the complicated world we live in all around the world. And so I would strongly encourage, and this is not advice for you and I. It was very heartwarming to me. My 11-year-old son, Prabnoor, his yearbook came home yesterday. And regardless of the attitude we get at the dinner tables all day, in his yearbook, I quickly saw it said, what do you think your next career is? What are you going to do when you grow up? And he had two options in there, an NBA player or investor. I thought, well, this is so heartwarming because he now understands the importance of the S&P 500, and every birthday dollar goes into the S&P 500. And candidly, for those of you that are likely going to work for the next 30 years, and there's almost everybody in the room here is going to do that, if you just put your money into the S&P 500 and have a little bit, now my son doesn't need the liquidity in Treasury, so he can go 100% S&P 500. You'll be just fine. And by the way, what's the biggest companies, 30% of the S&P 500 today? All the big tech companies that you and I would not have envisioned at the start of COVID were below $1 trillion in value, but they're $2 to $3 trillion in value today. So public markets are extremely important in one's personal wealth creation with patience and compounding. What you do in the private markets is a function of how much risk you have the appetite to take and your tolerance to actually play with some of your money. And I strongly encourage those that want to do that should absolutely do it, because in this part of the world, there's no other magic other than starting a startup and having it become a unicorn. So there's a lot of stuff that will happen. I hope that artificial intelligence has applications that makes ours even lazier, but hopefully what that does is it gives us more time to think. And I'm already trying in the last several years to try and figure out how to have less to do, more time to think. But artificial intelligence and life sciences will certainly add to longevity and productivity. In what function or proportion, hard to tell right now, but keep doing what you're doing. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, and we're both going to be doing it for future generations.
Any other questions?
There was the young guy at the back.
Hello, Dr. Jagdeep Bachher. First of all, before I get into my question, I want to say I'm really inspired of what you do and how you represent the Sikh community throughout as like being the CIO of the University of California. But I remember you indirectly sent me an article on a little boy's kindness and how it led to his fortune. I just want to say, throughout living in the Bay Area for a long time now, as my entire life, I've seen homelessness throughout almost everywhere I go. And on the other hand, I see billionaires. How would you create a wealth redistribution platform to equalize wealth and opportunities? And how do you think you can use your platform to help with that?
My God, that is a fantastic question. No, it's absolutely worthy of an applause. Can we all give him a round of applause? And Manveer, when you're running for office, make sure he's on your campaign team.
Hired.
Because it is the biggest thing we're all most curious about, that why can't our politicians and our public policy create an environment that enables us to bring more equality as opposed to grow the inequality. It's also a very important thing when we think about the wealth disparity, particularly in the Bay Area. And I work in Oakland. I'm not in Sunnyvale. I see things in Oakland you don't see in Sunnyvale every day, right in the center of downtown. And they aren't necessarily pleasant, and they actually feel unsafe. And that was not the case before COVID to the extent it is now. So we've actually had some significant disruptions that have come about from COVID as well. So I'm just reiterating the problem that you've actually stated eloquently. The issue around what we can do, I mean, everybody can play a role in some way, shape, or form, but the question is, what can we do? I think the types of things we address at the University of California are student housing has become unaffordable. You can go to Berkeley to get a great education. It costs you more for the housing. That's one of the issues that is very important for us to think about. Are there ways in which we can invest in more housing? Not an easy thing to do, because we obviously have to, at the same time as we're investing in these types of assets, we also have obligations to our pensioners, which is our fiduciary responsibility to make sure they get an income stream in perpetuity as long as they're alive when they retire. And that has to be at market rates versus at discounts, because you expect to get a full income. So clearly, I think there are needs in our community around housing, which we've been thinking about ways in which we can buy housing and maybe try and make it a bit more affordable and more, in line with what might work for our cost of capital versus what might work for other investors out there. That's one of the things that we've been trying to tackle. Beyond that, it's such a fantastic question. You've sort of got me thinking about what else are we doing? My team can help me out here for a second, but pensions. Yeah, look, it's also becoming very unaffordable to survive when you think about inflation, right? Inflation eats into your paycheck. And if you're getting a paycheck in retirement, the most important thing we can do in our office is to try and make sure that we're earning the maximum we can through the investments we make so that we can actually afford to pay out the pensions and meet those obligations in the future. That doesn't necessarily mean a lot when I describe it to you this way, but I remember days in COVID when I was in the office by myself and you'd have somebody who was trying to get a hold of our pension desk would come to our office and they need to make the rent payment the next week and they need to have assistance with their pension and they have a challenge in sort of making ends meet because things are getting expensive and they come to us to remind us of those obligations that they have. So that's the job that we've been given, which is not an easy one to begin with, but there are other things we're doing around that. For instance, like I said, around housing, all the other societal issues. I think, there are things around climate change that also has a direct impact on many things in society. That's an area we've been very focused on in making sure that we are living around the principles of having a more sustainable investment portfolio and addressing climate change from that perspective by investing in new technologies and things of that nature. But your question at the heart of it, I'm going to go away thinking about this, and if I was a politician or in public policy or in a different job, I would have to have sort of a 5-point policy and an approach for you in terms of how to solve these things. But last but not least, I will say, whatever you do, whatever your job is, you can sometimes get super busy and forget about helping others. And that helping others could be a person on the street that wants $1 from you because they say they want a cup of coffee. It just could be a kid that wants to get a job because it's hard to get an internship. And it could be someone who's having difficulty to make ends meet. I think just take the time to be appreciative of the people around you and find ways to help them. And that's a constant reminder for us at the University of California because 47% of the students are on Pell Grants. Some of the students and some of the stories we hear and some of the emails we get from the UC Investments Academy, if you can actually get a student who's the first gen in their family to go to college and get them a job in finance, or take a student from Merced and put them in Goldman Sachs through connections and community you create, you can change the trajectory not just of that individual, but of their family. And you can do it in places where aren't necessarily the ones you might think about, like in Sunnyvale or Palo Alto. And I really am going to apologize for saying something right now. The richer, the more privileged we might even be as kids or individuals, the more we think it's not our responsibility or we're too busy to help others. And in the Investments Academy, we have found that our success has come in Merced and in Davis and at Riverside, not at Berkeley, not at San Francisco, not in Los Angeles. So go to places where there is gratitude and there is appreciation and you can feel like you're making a difference. And when you start to feel that energy of gratitude and appreciation, it inspires you to want to do more. And I have to tell you, the more successful you get, or the most successful your parents are, you may not necessarily be thinking about this day in and day out. And that is where our parents and our families and those around us remind us that you don't need to be elitist in the way you operate, but you need to be human and realistic about what is around you in order to operate in a way that makes a difference to society.
Jagdeep, wonderful. I love having you. I don't like drinking wine alone, so now you can pour your glass because I think we're done, aren't we, Manvir?
I think that's all the time we have for questions. Huge round of applause, please, for our speakers.
Thank you.